last week,
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
I said I'd be back Wednesday to go through it and didn't happen.
Well, let's see, does she have another one?
She does not. She said tomorrow, and Monday.
Hi, Teresa, tomorrow and Monday. How are you? I'm doing well.
Oh, she talking to you like you're out.
We didn't expect the pandemic to happen.
Well, I guess we won't start on time without Andy and Eric.
And Dennis?
No Dennis tonight.
No Dennis tonight.
Okay.
I know Steve.
No Ellen
I
tonight.
know Ellen.
Yeah, no Ellen.
Is Marty coming?
Marty's coming.
Okay.
Well,
If he
yeah,
doesn't sleep.
We don't have enough.
yeah, he didn't go to, that's right. He wakes up. Yeah, he missed one. He won't miss this one.
Did you just say that? You already know.
Same with my Andy.
Oh,
That's okay.
okay.
He's disappeared.
Does she need a table?
Yeah, I'll look at the card table.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna wait for Andy anyway.
Very good.
Well, I won't wait all night for Andy.
No, it's not. Right, there are limitations.
We'll go 5.
We'll give him a few.
There she is. You just got a really comfy chair.
There's Marty.
Well, I hope it's comfy.
Yeah.
Hi, Marty. I think you're
Gonna be down there.
down there. Andy's gonna be up front.
Maybe.
You got the memo.
He gets to play for actress, but he'll be there.
I'll pick up my wreath and holder on Friday.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We've got 2 holders for you, I think.
One on stand up and one's on over.
2 over.
Okay, one of them is yours.
Oh, okay. All right. Good enough.
I don't care about sitting at the table. I just like to hand it share. Ooh, I hope that was something like Mike. Get elected president.
5.
It's on something.
Right.
It only shows on the screen we can see on the monitor. It's not showing up there.
That's the end of your career, Marty. Gone.
There he is, the man of the hour.
Sorry to be running a little slow.
The half hour.
Here we are.
Yes.
It's usually the last one because I'm the closest to it. So that's always the way it goes.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
Better late than not at all.
Exactly. I was gonna give you 5 minutes. You only used 2.
Thank you.
Angelica, are you ready?
Yeah.
Bill, are you ready? Okay. I will call this public meeting and hearing to order at 6:33. Would you all please stand if able and salute the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah.
So Captain, I'm still pulling up my Zoom, so I'll be just a quick minute here.
Okay, so we're gonna wait just a moment to actually start while Eric's getting the Zoom going. Don't want to leave anybody out. Does everyone who's here in the audience have a copy of the slides? They were available on the table out by the door, if you'd like one. Didn't occur to me to ask Eric if he was ready.
Well, I should have been already, but I'll just check. There we are. All right. Got it.
We see you're connecting to audio.
Okay, there we go.
You up?
And it should be. Yeah, okay, all right. So we're gonna do screen sharing. That's how we're gonna do this presentation, and then we'll have time for comments during and after the presentation. Screen share. That.
Okay, so what's in the green box is what's behind us.
Mhm. So you don't have to be craning backwards.
Right.
Selection. Right. I need a different screen.
Hey, there it is.
It's going all right, good, okay.
Yay. Okay, so this meeting is in person and available on Zoom. Eric, do we have anybody on currently? I don't think I saw anyone.
We had several, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Bill, can you tell us how many folks are on Zoom?
Okay.
Okay, great.
All right. So on this slide, it tells you how you can participate, teleconference or web conference using Zoom. And for more information, you can visit readfieldmaine.org. There is a presentation packet on the table outside the door if you'd like to have one to follow along. So this is our agenda for tonight. We're going to try and honor the agenda if at all possible, so that everyone can know what's expected and going to happen. So we'll begin with welcome and introductions from myself and Andy, and then we'll have a review of the budget and meeting goals. And then Eric will take it away for a presentation and discussion summary of the budget information. And we'll have some discussion around the town meeting warrant. I'll let the select board introduce themselves. Carol,
I'm Carol Dorenbos.
Hi, I'm Sean Keegan.
Catherine Mills Woodson, Dennis Price and Steve DeAngelis are both excused absent tonight. They had other commitments. Andy, would you like to do the?
Hi, I'm
Budget.
Andy Tolman. I'm the Budget Committee Chair, and I will follow in Catherine to make everybody speak for themselves.
Ed Sims.
Chris Salmons,
Marty Hanish. And Elaine Schneider is on the road and is therefore not here. She can't be in two places at once yet.
Aha. Okay.
So I'm gonna do this one and then you get everything else. right?
Yep.
So we've had a dozen public meetings and presentations as we develop the budget since last October. We've had some members of the public, a number of members of boards and committees, the budget committee and the select board and town staff all work on making this budget workable and fixing it so that it does what it needs to do. We've been through all the departments and the divisions at least once and most of them twice. We also worked with the select board to review and revise the 5-year capital plan, which is a big deal and very important.
Okay. I guess since we're screen sharing and people at home would not know who's speaking, we should identify ourselves when we speak.
Thank you.
For the audience as well, who's here. So this is Catherine Woodson again. So our goals tonight is to present the budget in summary form. That doesn't mean you can't ask detailed questions, but we're just going to be at the top level to begin. We welcome and we'll try to answer any questions, concerns, or comments related to this year's budget and warrant articles. We'll have a brief review of the proposed land use ordinance revisions. That's from the planning board. There's a proposed beach ordinance that the select board has been considering. And there's a proposed comprehensive plan update, which is also the planning board and the chair, I believe, of the committee. We'll give you the timeline for the information about the town meeting and secret ballot vote. It's still called a town meeting, even though we don't actually gather and meet. So the event is called a town meeting. We vote by secret ballot.
Why do we still call it that?
Because that's the legal name for it, right? We
Can
have
that
to,
be changed to an election? Because it's,
but it's not an election. The election is just for the people who are being asked to fill offices.
okay,
So we actually open the town meeting
We
at
do
the
every-
beginning
every-
of
yeah.
election day, right?
That's right. We 8 AM to 8 PM, we open the meeting. We have usually a moderator. And we perform those requirements of a town meeting, and then we vote by secret ballot.
what? You have a moderator at the election where everybody goes and puts a secret ballot in and,
Yes, the first item, Article 1, is elect a moderator by written ballot to preside at the said meeting. And
It's
that's
state
the
law.
official
Yeah.
state
opening.
law,
Yeah.
really?
That's the
Okay.
official opening
Okay.
of a town meeting.
Okay.
Okay,
Oh, did I go back?
No, I don't think they can move forward at all, at least not on the screen.
Oh, no, we did it freeze?
Oh, yeah. it's
That is
frozen
really
up
weird.
there,
Look
but
at
it's
that.
Not frozen down here.
That's
Oh,
that's interesting.
that's fine, I can read mine, just as long as the public.
Yeah.
right, well, the public can't see it then.
Bill,
Right.
Bill, which one's showing for you? Okay, so the projector is frozen on the first slide. I'm not sure why. But we'll continue. You can it's not critical that that's there, I think, because everybody here has packets, so
And we're on
Um,
slide 8.
yeah.
So our communications guru will come and see what he can do for us here.
But in the meantime, do you and Andy want to, or you or Andy go through the ongoing budget goals?
Sure. So our ongoing budget goals basically are set by the select board to improve communication with the public and incorporate public feedback in the budget. We do this by holding all those meetings that Andy talked about, as well as tonight's meeting. And then again, we'll have a public hearing at the end of May. That is the right date,
May 31st.
May 31st. Well, it is the end of May.
Very.
We've agreed that we will consider the town budget separate from school and county budgets because we have no control over those. And that's an ongoing discussion we're having about how much of that we should actually be including at all. But tonight we're talking just about the municipal, although we will mention where the county and school budgets are at this point in time. We try to focus on capital investment projects and utilize a long-range planning cycle. And the reasoning for that is to try and keep the town budget as close to level as possible so that we don't see a spike. Oh, well, let's go up by 10% this year and then drop 15% the next year and then go up 20% the year after. We try to save for things and plan things out so that we stay as level as possible. There are always increases because of inflation, but we try to keep that as steady as we can. We try to use designated and undesignated funds responsibly, and Eric will touch on the difference between those types of funds a little later. Responsibly means that we do want to save for some projects, but we don't want to save everything for those projects because then that means we're putting a lot of money aside and holding on to it and not using it. But we want to have some money so that we're not having to always borrow 100% of what we need. And the undesignated funds is kind of money that didn't get expended in the course of the current year. Am I pretty close, Teresa? And so then we have to decide what to do with that. And we try not to keep a large balance of that. We have a policy to keep a certain amount, and that will be on another slide coming forward. We're always trying to work together toward the public good. And somewhere there was a great thing I read today, Eric, I'm not sure where it was, but to provide the services that the community wants and expects at the lowest cost possible. And so it may not look like a budget that other communities have because Readfield has different expectations than another town. And so there'll be things that we'll focus on that other towns might not. Okay. The goals that we set for this year were to minimize the budget impact to taxpayers. That's by doing the things that we were just talking about a minute ago. We tried, especially for this year, to reduce or postpone future projects that are not yet in progress. There's a danger in postponing things forever, because then all of a sudden things cost more, we have less money, and then the costs tend to go up a little too quickly. We wanted to fund all needed and necessary expenses to maintain our town and programs and not fall behind on things that are really necessary. We're trying to maintain fiscal responsibility and spend conservatively. That's really something that the budget committee focuses on at every meeting. They're always questioning everything that's coming forward to them about, is it really needed? Is this what you really want to accomplish? We're trying to maintain a steady level of debt. We're pursuing creative financing grants and community donations for projects. Probably more of that in future years than this year. I don't think we have a lot of donations thrown into our budget. And we're prioritizing investment in recreational assets and public facilities. That last one was a select board goal that we set in October, when we met. Okay, now let's see. Eric will probably let you do the next piece, but I just wanted to make one closing comment on my share here. At the last select board meeting, it may have been a little unclear either from myself or from another member about the difference in function between the budget committee and the select board and how the budget is comes to be. And so the process in Readfield is that everything goes through the budget committee and they do the once over on all the requests from everyone, from the town manager, department heads, boards, committees, and commissions, from outside groups that request donations, such as the sexual assault people and the senior center for the Cohen Senior Center for Aging. Everything comes through them and they scrutinize it, they discuss it, and then they make recommendations to the town manager on how to proceed and what to present to the select board. At that point, the select board discusses it and we give our 2 cents into the process. And sometimes these things go back and forth several times. And then eventually the select board will start. We have done this for a couple meetings now. We look at the actual recommendations from the budget committee and we say, yep, this looks good. We don't discuss those in nearly the detail. We don't spend the 30 to 40 hours doing this that the budget committee does, which we all are very indebted to you for doing, because it means we don't have to do that time. And then we make the decision to put it on the warrant with a recommendation of passing or not passing. And then the budget committee takes those and they make their own decision on whether it should pass or not pass. And then the budget is set, but it's not approved until town meeting takes place and all of the residents who are registered voters vote and tell us, yes, spend it here, no, don't spend it there. And then our job falls to spend that money the way town meeting said to do so. So that's how the whole process works. And I want to thank Marty for helping out with clarifying that over the last week. So if there aren't any questions on that statement, we'll pass it over to Eric and he'll start with revenue and then we'll go through expenses. We'll get to talk about what it looks like coming up for taxes and get to the other points that were in the agenda.
Okay, thanks, Catherine.
You're welcome.
So thanks to the select board and the budget committee as always for working collaboratively on this. It's always a great back and forth. But I also want to thank staff, Teresa and Angelica, for their help with the budget process, because they do a tremendous amount of work and I appreciate that. So I will start with revenue highlights and we start typically with the tax base, which is the total valuable property in town that is taxed. we are estimating a 0.5% increase in the tax base because of growth. And that's things like improvements to structures, new construction, those type of things. With the revenue picture, we did look at COVID impacts, and they're less than in prior years, but we are still seeing some COVID impacts on revenue. They are quite pronounced when we start looking at expenditures because of the cost of things, but revenues, there are still impacts there. One of those is that revenue sharing estimates are up about 7.5% from $400,000 to $430,000 for the state of Maine. That's a positive thing, and that I think is a result of two things: us being conservative in our revenue estimates in prior years, and the state, seeing some softening of activity in the state, tourism and things like that help bring in revenue that they then can help distribute back to the municipalities. Investment income is up over $30,000, and that is due to a new investment program or policy for reserve balances. Essentially, we have money that stays in our account, and we'll talk about that later. But that money in the past has just been in a either a sweep account or a modified checking account of some kind, and only accruing 0.5% interest annually. And so we're looking at doing a laddered investment program with CDs or treasuries or other tools like that of up to $1 million. And we're going to be discussing that with the select board. And that will give us an opportunity to get 3 to 4% interest. And that's going to help us with revenues. Motor vehicle revenues are down by $50,000. That's us being a little bit conservative, but one thing we've seen is that we're still having supply chain issues. People are still purchasing new vehicles, but not at the rate that they were before, when people had checks coming in for thousands of dollars from federal sources. So that's a change that we've seen that is a sizable impact. Moving on to continuation of revenue highlights. Catherine talked a little bit about the fund balances. Designated funds are essentially funds that are in reserve that have a specific purpose. They've been allocated for a specific purpose. It might be for the fire department. It might be for roads. Those are two common ones. Designated funds are up about $75,000 because we did make an effort to utilize those fund balances more. A large portion of that is from the fire truck reserve that we're drawing down to help with that purchase if that's approved by voters. The undesignated fund balance, as Catherine said, is really our cushion. It's money that doesn't have a specific purpose in mind. We want to keep, as Catherine said, a little bit of money in there, but not too much. And that is up, use of those funds is up by $50,000. One of the main purposes of undesignated funds is to help soften tax impacts and also to stabilize what people pay in taxes. So we'll talk about a little bit more about that when we get to the fund balance slides. Recreational revenues are up in almost every program, and that's due to increased participation. Our youth sports, we're now taking in kids from other towns, and that's good for our kids. It's good for their kids. It's good for our bottom line, but it does come with some impacts that we'll be talking about more than likely next budget cycle, as far as the burden on volunteers and administrative staff of managing 3 or 4 towns worth of youth sports. It's not an easy thing. Bond proceeds. So this is the other half of the fire truck equation, not half, but the other piece of it. If we go forward with purchasing a new fire truck, we would need a bond for a large portion of that. We expect about $75,000 to come out of reserves, and we look to borrow about $548,000. And I'm going to point out a caveat later on, but that's where things stand right now with that fire truck. And bonding is something that's addressed separately on the town meeting warrant. So every bond that we process does have a separate vote on it. Federal grant revenue of $30,000 is anticipated for the Church Road Sidewalk project. And that's part of a match. And then total transfer station revenues are up around $32,000. Unfortunately, the cost of operations are up more than that, but that 32,000 is in part because we increased the fee structure, which we hadn't done in several years, and we think is keeping pace with inflation and helping to minimize costs to taxpayers, because we're not paying for someone else's couch, someone else's demolition project. The people doing that work are. And then the final point on revenue is that First Park is once again anticipated to be equal to or exceed expenses for that venture. And folks should know that that's the business park in Oakland that the town invested in 25 years ago. And we're finally getting to the point of turning a profit on that. And that's a good thing. It couldn't come soon enough. I wish it had come 20 years ago, but we've had some setbacks, including the 2008 financial crisis, COVID, and a few other things along the way. Here is a department level summary of where revenues stand. I hit some of the highlights, but this is where things look overall. I'll start with the bottom and say that we have a 17% increase in revenue, almost $1.2 million. Again, about 600,000 of that is from, or 550, I guess, probably 600, a little over 600 is revenue related to the fire truck, including use of designated funds and bond proceeds. One of the remainder of that revenue increase is from tax impact. But I want to point out that that tax impact is for all services, including education. So the $350,000 increase in education is squarely the revenue in taxes is what's covering that, excuse me. So that's important to point out, but it doesn't show in this piece because it's in the administration department. And that's something I'll show next year. So this is a graphic representation of what was just in that table. And you can see the two things I pointed out that are the big changes, the increase in capital reserves and the administration. And again, most of that is in taxes, and I'll show you how that looks. We're going to break out that blue line on the right, and that's going to show right here all of our administration department revenue sources. And again, we see a decrease in the very middle of the page. That's where that $50,000 I talked about for motor vehicles is down. We're seeing small increases here and there, $30,000, about 2 or 3 from the left for investment income. So again, this is just repeating and showing in a different way some of the revenue sources I've already identified. But the big one is that 396,000 really increase in tax revenue. And that's the tax impact overall. That isn't just the school, but a majority of it, 80–90% of it is from the school. So I'm going to move on to fund balances. Actually, I'll stop right there and ask if there's any questions about revenues. I'm going to stop screen sharing and hopefully I can get back here, but I just want to make sure we're not missing anybody on Zoom. So we can look at faces and see if there's any questions or hands raised. Anybody in the audience have any questions about revenues? We're going to ask again later. We definitely have time to take some time to absorb this because there's a lot coming up. Bill, do you see anybody on Zoom, anything in the chat? Okay, thanks.
I'll just make one comment that one thing that was shown as a decrease is the interest on taxes. That's the interest that we collect from people who pay their taxes late. And that was one of the things that the auditors mentioned this year in particular about last year, was that we have a tremendous rate in Readfield of people paying their taxes on time. And so we collected much less in property taxes, interest on late property taxes. And so we're forecasting that that will be the trend. And so that's why there's a decrease here. And this is a good thing because we don't want to be collecting that money. We want people to be able to afford what they have for bills and to pay them on time. So
Eric, I have a quick one. So when you're saying the change in revenues and administration is mostly the schools, but that's in 1 year's time over the previous budget.
Yes.
So explain that 300 and like that really large increase in revenues to the hundreds of thousands.
Yes, so the 395,000, that is the increase, the net increase in what we are collecting in real estate taxes. Or real estate, and the reason for majority of that is because of the school increase. The town, I think, has a roughly $46,000 net increase from last year to this year in what people are actually paying out of pocket townwide.
So you're talking about taxes, right?
Taxes.
Taxes based on the increase in school.
Well, those things are together, so what I'll say is, I'll just back up and say that the town has to collect taxes for the school, to pay for the school. And so one of the lines that we show for revenue is tax revenue. What comes out of, because we have lots of other revenue sources. The town collects money for excise tax, and that goes to help offset the cost of roads. The town collects money for building permits and fees, and that goes to help offset the cost of the code officer. So on transfer station fees help offset the transfer station along with revenue from the towns. But the school, we don't have that option. So when there's an increase in the school budget, unless the town takes money out of our designated fund, which we, as a policy, try not to do, or undesignated, excuse me, all of those increases have to come from tax dollars, from taxpayers. And so we don't have any control over that. And so it shows up as a revenue. Of course, it's offset by that very large expense from the school, and again, contributing factor, a little bit of an increase from the county and the town.
And that number's not final yet from the school, right? They're still negotiating.
It's
and
not.
still-
I'm being optimistic at the 10%. At the meeting, they were talking about 15%.
Right.
What we see with the school budget typically, I don't want to spend too much time on it, is that they start off with a very large number and then kind of work it down over the course of their budget process to a number that's, 2/3, 3/4 what they originally project. And that's just how their budget process works. We try to be a bit more linear in what we present and have changes that are less dramatic than that, because I think it gives a better view of what's actually happening. But
So the amount that was included in this budget, I'm pretty close, I think, is about $361,000 increase for the school is the estimate that Eric is using. That's, we're already paying, we pay just over 300,000 a month for 12 months. So we're paying about 3.6 million already to the school, and they're looking at a 10% increase would be about that $360,000. But that's not the number that we heard last week when we were at the school board meeting. It was much higher. So Eric's hoping that that's what it would be, and that's what we put into this budget.
But that's
But
one of
the-
the risks with us collecting money for somebody else and then trying to guess what their budget's going to be. It makes it hard for us to budget.
And so this is all part of that discussion that I think we're going to be having over the course of the next year, is how we talk about our budget and what people pay in taxes. A lot of towns have town meeting in March, and there is no set school budget in most districts at that point, and there is no set county budget. And so they just talk about municipal. And we could choose to do something more along those lines, which is what we've been leaning towards by separating this out every year and saying, okay, we can only control in this room what the town spends, not what the county tells us we must pay or what the school asks us to pay and all of the townspeople vote on. So it's hard because we have to collect money and pay it, but we have no control over that. So, but you, the voters, do.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about those fund balances and the fund highlights. And we talked about a little bit that those things are there to help stabilize the tax impacts, primarily on the municipal side, because those funds, whether designated or undesignated, are all a result of money that was collected for municipal departments, municipal purposes, municipal functions that may have been intentionally collected to allocate, or may have been a small unexpended balance, or even a large one that rolls forward. The fund balances are conservative. We try not to estimate too high because there's a risk if we think we have more in those accounts than we actually do. That's risky. It's like taking your bank account and saying, well, geez, I probably got 50 grand in there and you only got 20 and you buy a car that costs 30, you're in trouble. So we do try to be conservative with those numbers. The use of designated funds and undesignated funds, we've touched upon already. 75,000, 50, and then 50,000 respectively. And this is that policy Catherine was talking about, 2/12. We try to maintain basically 2 months worth of expenditures for all of the potential expenditures, and that includes the RSU. So one reason why we have a fund balance that's quite high is because we have to think about what happens if there's a problem at the school. We don't anticipate that. They've done a good job, but it wasn't long ago the town of Winthrop was struggling because they had school budget issues that affected the municipality. It's a possibility, it's a slim one, but regardless, we have a policy that gives us that buffer, and that's what our undesignated fund balance policy is. Right now, we expect to be about 20% above the minimum threshold. So we never want to be below the threshold. We like to be close to it, but we're expecting to be about 20% above this year, given the use of funds that we're allocating, or excuse me, requesting. And I think one reason why I'm comfortable with this being a little bit higher than it has been in the past is because I think we're going to be using it again next year, because I think we're going to have some impacts next year as we try to smooth out tax impacts and don't have a big drop and a big spike, which is what we're kind of recovering from right now. So this is what a graphic representation of what our fund balances look like. Right now, I'll say the red, solid, blue, with a 70% or so shading. First one is designated funds. That's those things that we have a specific purpose for. And then the blue with the spots is the undesignated fund balance. And what we're doing, you see towards the right-hand side of this chart, we're trying to stabilize and maybe draw down some of those. We don't want to see too much of an increase. We expect a natural increase because as budgets go up, every year, then that balance necessarily goes up because that's how it's set by policy. But this shows that we have roughly 3.5 million, something like that, 3.6 in reserves, and that's or excuse me, not 3.6, it's 1.5 and 1.2, so 2.7 million, and that's why we're looking at the possibility of investing some of that money into CDs and other investment tools. This changes every year. Part of this is cash flow, right? So we have expenditures that happen on a regular basis and some spikes, but we have revenue only coming in really in large quantities twice a year, September and February, when taxes are due, right? So we have big hills and valleys. So we don't want to have too little money in that account and then have a cash flow problem. So I'm hitting on a few different things all at once here, but I just wanted to show what those balances are and really identify the fact that we're trying to be conservative and responsible with those and not draw them down too much, but also not let them get too big. So I'll move on to expense highlights and talk about really two things, labor costs and materials costs. As you know, we've been in inflationary times for the last 2 years, maybe a little bit more. And so that has had an impact on pretty much every piece of business that we do in the town of Readfield, and with the RSU as well. So I don't want to just, give them a hard time for having a large increase. There's reasons for it. But all I can say is for the town of Readfield, one of the primary reasons, two of the primary reasons are labor and materials. So we are seeing about a $30,000 increase in administration costs for labor and insurance. We're seeing office equipment. It looks like it's going up a lot, but it's actually only going up by a couple $1,000s. The reason is that we had a change of where those expenditures were located. They had been in contract services, but we moved them into a different line under computers and software, which is much more of an appropriate location for the software and office equipment expenses.
So I'm sorry on that. So we didn't change the way we're doing that. We just changed it in the accounting.
It's just an accounting
Okay.
change. Yeah, the cost is up by like 5 or 10%, somewhere in that range. But it's just a transfer. Assessing is down. And code enforcement is up. Those nearly offset one another. Those two departments are related. And one reason assessing is down is because we are getting ready. We had budgeted a little bit more for document work and digitization of our tax maps to a form that we can put online to help realtors and other professionals and residents see what's actually happening with their property and their assessments. So that's one reason why it's going down. Code is going up in part because of labor costs. Grant writing and planning is up $3,000. One thing I didn't note, but Carol, I wanted to point this out for you particularly, is that I did, based on feedback from the select board meeting, look at using $5,000 out of the designated reserve. So even though we have a $3,000 increase from year to year, I did look at it and felt comfortable advocating for a $5,000 use of reserve funds to help mitigate that impact. So we're actually seeing less of an overall tax impact. That won't be able to be done every year, but it's something we can do this year to help soften that.
It just seemed, sorry, just my little side note. I think we had $2,000 set aside for grant writing and we were increasing it to 8,000.
Well, so this is one of those things that went back and forth. Last year, we actually had 7,000 in reserve or in expenditures budgeted for planning. And then during the initial part of the budget process, I had lowered that to 2, but recommendations came through that we should be looking at increasing that. And seemed to be a direction that the budget committee wanted to head and the select board wanted to head. So that was increased. And then per your comments, we made an effort to minimize that impact by using reserve funds.
But what did we use actually of what was budgeted last year for grants?
I'd have to look back.
Did we use it all?
Quite likely. I think that we've been
Okay.
actually using, we've spent it, I think we've been using out of select board contingency for some grant writing and planning services. So I'm certain we used it all.
It said in 2022, the actual is 9,707.
So we overspent.
Grant writing? Okay.
So we overspent,
Okay.
In the
unfortunately.
year before, we had none.
That's what I'm saying. It just seems in one year that seemed like a lot, but last year
It
we
depends on
exceeded
what
that.
projects we're working on and if we're trying to get money that we don't have to actually spend. So if you spend a couple thousand writing a grant and you get $50,000, you're $48,000 to the good.
Mhm.
So that makes a lot of financial sense.
So legal fees, those are down by $25,000. We had established a legal reserve probably 3 years ago and had been adding between $25,000 and $50,000 to that to build up a reserve. We were able to decrease that because we have roughly $50,000 in that reserve now. However, there is always the threat of litigation, and we do have right now a frivolous, in my opinion, lawsuit against the town that will very likely be dismissed in short order. But we have those from time to time. They're expensive to defend, but the town has no real option other than to defend against lawsuits that are brought. Moving on to maintenance, the department is up a net of 16,000, due in large part, again, to labor and materials costs. Community Services Department, we have a $1,500 roughly increase in animal control officer line. Part of that's a stipend increase. Part of that is adding some support time so that if the ACO isn't available, we can have someone on call to respond to help out with needed animal control issues. The library is up around 5,000, again, mostly due to labor. 4250 decrease in streetlights. We had for the last couple of years added 3 or so lights each year, and I think we reached more or less the saturation point for those. So we don't have any hardware costs in there. But also, what we've seen is a decrease in our electric bill by switching to LED. So those have dramatically reduced what we were paying CMP for the cost of electricity to run those. So that's a positive, I think. Recreation, parks and activities expenses are down or flat for all the divisions. That's a good thing, especially considering the change in revenues that we saw. Unfortunately, swim lessons are not able to be offered this year. That saved us, I think, $4,000 or $5,000. But it's not money I want to save. I would love to see a swim program so kids in town can learn to swim at our lake. But that's something we'll be working on in the future. Again, affected by COVID, there's a labor shortage. The YMCA can't provide that service for us. So more expense highlights: ambulance and budget under the protection division. Those are up. Ambulance is up a modest $2,670. That's through the Winthrop Ambulance Service. So they provide that service for us. And it is essentially a pass through. We don't have much say in what they charge us for ambulance services, but just like everybody else, they've seen increases in labor costs and probably insurance as well. Dispatching is a bit of a special case. We had been dispatching a portion of our services for the 911 portion through Somerset County. That was actually, we received word earlier this year that they will no longer be providing that service for us. So we're going to have to switch to Androscoggin County. We're grateful they're willing to work with us. We're trying to find a long-term solution that involves dispatch for 911 services through either the county or the state, someplace more local like Augusta, or perhaps someplace else in Kennebec County. But switching dispatch service is going to cost us about $6,500 more than it did last year. Again, I'm not going to squawk too much because it's an essential service, but we know we can probably do a little bit better, and we're trying to find a solution.
And I'd just like to add that that's a change that occurred to 16
Yes.
towns and communities and cities, including Waterville, in Kennebec County. So it wasn't just Readfield got singled out, and, you know, we didn't do anything wrong. But Somerset County can't continue funding and hiring enough people to run the service. So they pulled back, and that's been in the news a lot. So there's more information there.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Catherine. Cemeteries is budgeted flat. So that's always a positive thing. Thank you, Andy, for your work on doing that. And the cemetery committee, they were very responsive when we reached out and said, hey, we're trying to keep things minimal. And they did a fine job of that. So thank you. Roads and drainage, we are essentially flat on summer road maintenance, which I think took a little bit of work. I want to thank the road committee for their effort to keep those summer road expenses flat. Winter roads, we're seeing an increase, fairly sizable. It's a big number, but also because those are big numbers for winter road maintenance. We are $385,000 just for the contract this current year. We expect that we'll see a 5 or 6% increase based on inflation, which is how we, the consumer price index is what we use to escalate that contract. And we're also seeing increases in the cost of salt, which is what the town pays for the salt as part of that contract, because we get great deals through either KV-COG or the state of Maine. And it's something that the contractor doesn't then mark up and then sell back to us through part of their contract deal. So we try to be efficient there, but we still have costs that are increasing. So that's that.
And this will be year 2 of a 4-year contract.
4-year contract. And we're going to have to think about how we approach winter maintenance in the future. But right now we've got a few years to think about it. And Scott is doing Horn Construction. Scott Horn are doing a very good job. People have been very happy with the level of service. I wish there was a little bit less sand on the side of the road right now, but it kept people safe all winter. So I guess I can't complain. Moving on to solid waste, we have a $48,000 increase here. If you recall, we said we had a budgeted $32,000 increase in revenues. So net, we're seeing an actual tax impact increase on that, unfortunately, but the costs that we have come to us from contractors. And so we have not as much flexibility there as we'd like. It is offset in part by other towns, so we're happy to have that cost sharing with the towns of Fayette and Easton. This is where we hit education again. We're up, or no, the education budget is up an estimated 10% or 371,000. Again, we don't know how accurate that number is, but we expect it's close. Debt service, if the new fire truck is moved forward with, we would see a new interest payment at the start of next fiscal year for around $10,000. As far as the unclassified fund goes, or department, the revaluation expenses were increased by $25,000. The revaluation is something we do intermittently to help make sure that taxes are distributed as fairly as possible. Our assessor has a great line that taxes are inherently unfair, but the revaluation and his job is to make sure that they're equally unfair. So that someone with a similar sized home with a similar level of improvements is taxed close as possible to someone who with similar property. So we haven't done a revaluation for probably 17 or 18 years. It's been quite a run. We wanted to do it earlier, but COVID, as you all know, has really messed up the markets. And so we're starting to see a plateau. We feel comfortable that we can move forward with some of that work. We have a 4-year plan, so we'll be spending $25,000 each year over 4 years to do that revaluation. And the good thing is, because we've been putting money away over the past 10 years for this, all of that expense is being covered by reserves. So just one example of how putting money aside can help smooth tax impacts. And as soon as that's done, we'll start saving up for the next one. Moving on, so I hit the highlights through that presentation there. And the expense summary table that shows hits on most of those. Again, you can see capital improvements, big increase, solid waste, there's a $50,000 increase. All the numbers I just talked about and a few others. County tax is up only about 1%, $3,000. That's an interesting one because the county budget, their actual overall tax impact is going up 5%. But because they tax the municipalities, the 16 of us, based on our relative value, according to the state of Maine, that impact changes. So towns like, I think, Belgrade and Fayette and Wayne actually increased more than the town of Readfield. So even though their budget's going up 5%, we're only seeing a 1% impact in Readfield because other towns have seen more growth than we have.
Eric, did you miss a slide?
I was gonna say, can we?
There was a capital slide.
I didn't hear it.
Did I? Oh, geez. Yeah, no, I did. I am sorry. That was unintentional. Big numbers, but it was unintentional. I have to do this with my mouse, like the arrows aren't working, but so capital improvements, thank you both for clarifying that. So $623,057 is what is anticipated for the purchase of that new fire truck. Lee, I asked him to be here tonight. He can't be, unfortunately, because he is doing a training for the mutual aid. But we can certainly spend a little bit of time talking about this if folks want. But basically, we have had a truck in the budget to be replaced. It was originally slated for 2018. We stretched it out as much as we could until 2023. And now we're proposing this purchase. We are looking at getting a different truck. The old one had a little bit less capacity. The new one would be a tanker pumper and not just a smaller tanker. So there's definitely a change in capacity there. I don't want folks to think that we're doing in kind. Can
you repeat what you just said
So
about the different kind of truck?
yeah, so the truck that was going to be replaced was a smaller truck that just had a tank on it. What is being requested is a truck that has more functionality. It's a tanker pumper, so it can do two jobs instead of just one, basically. And it has a lot more capacity in the tank than the old one does. So the recommendation came forward that we would upgrade as we're replacing. So that is something that people should be aware of. Another piece of this is that even if we budget for this and purchase this in 2023, we might not actually take delivery of that truck until 2025 because the scheduled delivery is 18 to 24 months on these things at this point. And so the question has been asked, why not just put it off and bond for it when rates are lower or when costs are lower? The trouble is, I think that the Fed's been raising interest rates. They're probably not going to be in a hurry to lower them. I expect in the main bond bank, who we borrow from primarily, expects that things will stabilize, but we're not going to see a dramatic change. So there's not much value in waiting to borrow. The other piece of this is that costs continue to increase. We saw a sizable increase between last year when we first got this looked at and we first asked for a quote from the manufacturer. We saw something like a 20% increase. It was a lot. So we feel, I believe, that doing it now makes sense because the interest rates won't be any better. They might be worse, but we are fairly certain that the cost will be more. And again, this is something that we've been looking at replacing, and it's been overdue. But the other piece is that, yeah, we're changing the capacity on it. So I do want to stop and ask if there's any questions about that specifically, because it's a big item.
Well, Eric, isn't it also a case that if we don't get approval from the town in 23-24, we can't submit a purchase order to the manufacturer
Correct.
until the town has authorized that purchase and the bonding. So whenever, if we put off making a decision for a year, that's putting off getting the new truck for an additional year.
That's correct. Yes.
And there's the fire department has always worked on a schedule of replacing trucks. This truck that we're replacing is approaching 40 years old. And we want something that's reliable, and that also affects our property insurance rates for your homeowners. Having a fire department that has a high rating because they have equipment that's reliable and their response times are reasonable to protect property. And we have another fire truck in the capital investment improvement plan, I believe, in 2 more years.
Well, that was an error. So that one actually, we were actually after this, we're something like 12 or 15 years out before we've looked at
Okay.
another one. So
Cool. So we're much farther out. And so we don't want to get too far off on our schedule. And Lee's done a really great job in trying to keep things together and saying, okay, we can wait. But now it's been 5 years. And the current truck is just getting older and less reliable. And so that's the reason for putting it in now. Is this a good time to talk about what we discussed earlier today?
yes, it is. So we do borrow and bond fairly often, and we've actually every 3 to 5 years, sometimes more often, sometimes less often, take out bonds to pay for municipal projects that are in excess of what we can spend out of reserves, or we want to break that expense out over a long period of time. 3 years ago, we borrowed for 3 municipal projects, some paving work, work to the library, and work to the fire station for a sprinkler system. We put out those items for bid. The sprinkler system, we actually had tried to do a bid last year, and it didn't work out because we didn't have the interest. We did it again this year, and neither one of those projects had a single bid. So we're running into some trouble with spending that money. And one of the things that we could look at, that I'm actually, after talking with the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, talking with our lawyers, and thinking about it a little bit, mentioning it at the budget committee meetings and talking to a few select board members, it might make sense to allocate some of those unspent bond funds towards the purchase of the fire truck. And the thing that really sold me on that approach is that we have $200,000 sitting in reserve that's depreciating in value every year, that we borrowed at a 1.9% interest rate. if we borrow for the fire truck this year, we're looking at about a 4% interest rate. So one of the things that you can correlate between personal finances and municipal finances, which are somewhat few and far between, but one of them is that you always want to pay off your higher interest loans or debts first. So by using money that we borrowed at a lower rate to offset what we would have to borrow at a higher rate, we would save money on interest and principal. So we would then have to think about what we're going to do about that sprinkler system. Right now, we know that we're probably not going to get anybody to bid on it because they're all doing simpler new construction projects that that don't require retrofit, that are for projects that are in a pipeline through a general contractor. One of the things we heard from those folks was that they didn't really want to be the GC. They wanted to have somebody else be the GC. But the town, we certainly don't have the capacity to be the GC on a specialized project like a sprinkler installation with a retrofit. So we had done this because we wanted to use those special rooms that we put in the fire station for overnight. We've talked to the fire marshal's office and they said, those rooms can stay, but as long as you don't have someone stationed there, I mean, if it gets used once in a while for an emergency, that's something different. But as long as we don't have someone stationed there, we're okay. So I guess I believe that we have the opportunity to look at what's happening right in front of us, which is people don't want to do the work and the money is just sitting there that's going to be hard to spend. And maybe in a couple of years, maybe interest rates will go down. Certainly not next year. And maybe in a couple of years, the labor market will loosen up a bit and they'll be able to do the work for us. So it makes sense, I think, to do that. So the select board is going to be considering this actively at their meeting on Monday. And then the budget committee will also be considering this. But I wanted to bring it up because this could help really make a big impact on the borrowing next year, not this year. This year, we only have $10,000 in interest. And that might drop to like 5, right? So this year's tax impact is low, but next year we might see a 10 or a 20 or a $30,000, depending on how it all shapes up, decrease in what we're paying for debt service. So as we expect inflation to continue to be a factor, other things continuing to escalate, this could be a little bit of a relief for us. But we want to remember that we're going to have to pay for this eventually. So I don't want to go off the radar. I think it's just something that we could do intelligently right now, given the circumstances. How's that, Catherine?
That's awesome. And,
Okay.
and so what that would mean is that instead of having a bond request for 548,000, we would have a bond request for 348,000 because we've got the 200,000 sitting in a reserve account. That's costing us less money than borrowing new money, and we can't get anyone to do the work.
Yep.
And so that's what we need to discuss and decide if that really makes more sense. And so that would
in
change.
short order.
Yeah, that would change some of the information that's in here, but it would be clear on the town warrant with the correct borrowing costs and so on.
All right, so that's the fire truck. Moving on to the 2 building reserves, Guile Hall and the library. We try to fund those based on what we see as a accumulation of future expenditures. We had been saving actively for work. This last year, we installed heat pumps at the town office here, and we've done a lot of other work. So we don't think we need to be saving at the same rate we were before. We still have $10,000 going into the Guile Hall Reserve this year, but it's less than what was last year. So that's where that difference comes in. The library, we still have $5,000 in reserve, but because we've done a lot of work lately, and we still have $50,000 in reserve to spend on improvements to that building, we're reducing that level of savings. And this really does get back to that point of using those reserves intelligently. We're not trying to just sock money away just because we can. The idea is to build it up and then get to a level that's sustainable. And then as we spend out of it, to replenish it. $50,000 flat budget for the open space fund. That's a big number, but it's the same as last year. It is more than what was 2 years ago. And then we have $392,000 for paving and infrastructure. 325 of that is for paving projects and for reserve. And I'll just stop and mention that the reason we have that number is because we have an inventory of all of our roads in town. And we look at what it would cost to add a 1-inch maintenance overlay plus shoulder work and gravel based on the expected life cycle of the most recent improvement to that road. So some roads have a 12-year cycle, some roads have a 20-year cycle. But when you add all of that up and look at it, the cost over the life of those improvements, you can get an annual dollar value that you need to put away to meet those needs and to maintain the roads to the, I will say, very high standard that the town of Readfield has for our roads. We spend money on roads. Sometimes I wish it was less, sometimes I wish it was more, but it's definitely a priority for us. And so that 325,000 reflects some spending this year on paving. Right now, we're trying to work with the road committee to decide whether that should be spent on Lane Road and North Wayne Road or on Thunder Castle. There are chunks of Thunder Castle that are getting awfully rough, but we also have some really bad base issues on North Wayne Road Lane Road, as you head down the hill. It's got that W shape, and that's not a good thing. So we need to think about how to address that. So we are working with the road committee, and that number does have a basis in need, whether it's present year spending or saving for future projects. And then we have 60,500 for the Church Road sidewalk, with 80% of that being paid for out of revenues from a federal match for the project. Right now, where we are with that project is we are just finishing up the design, the preliminary design phase with our engineers. And then we're going to get some cost estimates. We're going to have some public meetings, talk about that project. And then I expect either in November, but more than likely in June of next year, the town will have a chance to vote on whether we want to spend the money to build the project. Right now, we have a grant that covers 80% of the design and planning phase that we've committed to. So we're in the middle of that right now. We're going to wrap that up, and then we're going to make a decision about whether we want to proceed. But that's a future town meeting vote.
Eric, what's the cost of the 20% that town has to pour
So
for the design phase?
So the design phase, it would be 20% of around 80,000. So what is that? That would be 16,000. Yeah, for the design of that project.
For the design,
Yes.
It's 80,000.
80,000 until it's
to
16,000.
do a
to be the-
design.
Yes, it's a quarter mile of pretty involved engineering work. And it's also a federal project, so they have requirements that are far above what we would normally do for a project like this.
They haven't
So-
even decided which side yet.
We haven't decided which side, and that actually adds to the cost because we are working on 20% designs for both sides of the road, so we can actually make an informed decision about which one makes more sense financially and functionally. I will say that if we were to do a sidewalk without federal dollars, we would definitely spend more than $16,000 on design. So there's trade-offs. I mean, we're spending more than we would otherwise, but we're getting a larger share of it, a vastly larger share of it paid for through federal dollars.
And we've already allocated that money through past town meetings. So that's in
Yes.
reserve, what we're paying for that.
Yep. And so this number represents the expenditure. We already spent some this fiscal year. This represents the expenditure for the next fiscal year.
And I think you said after we get the design and maybe now after the cost estimates, then the public will be heard. I know that's the question people are asking is when they have input.
Yeah, so
Plan.
there's again, we can't discuss something that we can't see. And so we have to wait until we have designs before we start talking to the public, because otherwise it's just, well, what if? And I don't want to sit in a room and say, well, I don't know because I haven't seen a plan. I think we all owe it to each other to sit down and talk about a plan that has some numbers to it, hopefully, and look at both sides of the road. And then make a decision, do we do one, do we do the other, or do we do nothing? Which is also an option, so. And then I guess the last point on this capital slide is that we do have ongoing lease payments and reserve at the transfer station. So I did talk about solid waste, so I did that slide. And then this is the table that goes over those numbers that we just discussed. And I won't sit on that too long. This is the graphic representation. So,
Eric.
oh, yep.
That one's been that way.
Yeah, I gave up on that. It's there's something going on with that connection.
Okay,
I think everybody on Zoom can see
Yeah.
the image that we have on the screen on this screen.
okay.
And hopefully everybody can follow.
And everyone
along.
else
There-
has a packet.
has
so
paper, yeah.
Thank you.
So capital improvements, you see that large increase there, and then education is the other large increase.
Eric,
Yes,
a thought for the future. Looking at this, the detailed expense summary.
Mm.
Education accounts for just about 50% of our total expense budget.
Mm.
And
Way more than that.
one thing that we might be worth considering and at least discussing with the auditors is whether we should change our fiscal year to coincide better with the school budget. Because one of the things that Eric brings up at all of our budget committee meetings, is that we never have the final school budget when we ask the town to vote on the Readfield budget. So our biggest single expense item that accounts for 50% of everything, every dollar we lay out, we're guessing. If we changed our fiscal year to the calendar year, there'd be less guesswork about the school budget. Not an easy thing to change fiscal years, but
Marty, what are you doing to me?
Well, we're on the same fiscal year as the school currently. And so
no.
they
Isn't
worked
school-
on a July 1 through June 30th.
It's their voting schedule and their budget, because right now we are talking about budgets. at the
That's
same
what I
time.
mean, that
Yeah.
if we changed our fiscal year to the calendar year, when we adopt our budget, we would have an actual figure for more than half the year for the school. Right now, we're guessing at the school payment for all 12 months of the year. If we could reduce the guessing, there'd be more precision in it.
That's something we can consider, but I do want to make a correction for you. It's 78%.
Sorry,
of our property.
76.
Okay, well, your slide says 78.
Yeah, there is a
Okay.
typo.
It's
there.
76% of our taxes goes to
Okay.
the school.
I meant as an expense, it's 4 million.
Yeah, as an
roughly
expense.
$4
yeah.
million paid to the school out of an $8 million expense budget. I wasn't referring to the tax impact.
Okay, so thanks, Marty. It's an interesting thought. I think we should talk about that, and we should talk about that in the context of, sorry, Bill, I keep hitting my mic. In the context of that meeting that we have with the budget committee and the select board to talk about policy and how we want to approach even how we talk about the budget. So that's a key piece there.
Eric, can I go back to question on the decrease in library building reserves? So
Yeah.
I know in the last few years, the libraries had a new roof. I think they worked on the gutters, they worked on the chimneys.
Yep.
We budgeted already for the renovations of the upstairs. We've last year voted in for the parking lot. So if we still have $50,000 in library reserves, every time we do something for the library, why do we have to vote on spending more money on it when we have this chunk already saved for improvements at the library? Or what else is proposed?
So that
For a
50,
change
that
there.
50,000 was proposed for the work that we just put out to bid, but didn't get someone to bid on.
Okay,
That project, unlike the fire truck, or excuse me, unlike the fire suppression system for the fire station, I believe that we can accomplish the work that was originally budgeted, intended to be done with that money at the library. Some of it is going to be done with the town acting as the general contractor for things like the second floor egress. We will have to work with someone that does metal fabrication to put in that fire escape that's going to be on the backside. That's a level of work that we can handle. And I think that we can, if we wait a little while and be diligent, find a local contractor to do that work. So that 50,000 that I was mentioning is already basically allocated for
So it's
those
earmarked already.
earmarked for those
So it's not
projects. Yeah.
In reserve, it's
I mean, it is.
designated.
It's a designated reserve, right?
Okay,
So the 5,000 is just continual savings at a lower rate than the 15 we had been for things that come up in the future.
Yeah, like we know we're gonna have to paint the building again. We're starting to see peeling. We know that we're gonna have to work on issues with the foundation because those, we had a skunk crawl in there and die. I don't know how it happened, but it got stuck. And it was, anyway, that was a whole thing. For the poor librarian for a while, but we eventually, Ben Rodriguez stuck his arm in there and pulled out a skeleton of a skunk. It was something.
and if I can.
Yeah.
Once again, ask for open space to be in its own question. I think there's a lot of confusion in town what that is, what it's used for. And there was a significant increase last year. That was not very transparent. So having it lumped into this big capital improvements, I still would like to call for that to be its own article question on the warrant. Be
That's something the
considered.
select board can consider at their next
They
meeting.
can, and if anybody from the public wants it as well, they should let people know.
Okay. So I guess the graphical representation we've talked about enough. That's the okay. So now we'll move on to long-term debt service. And this relates to that discussion we just had about the fire truck. What we try to do is balance out what we put into reserves, what we take out of reserves, and what we borrow to maintain a fairly stable tax rate. With the borrowing that's being proposed for the fire truck currently, that 540,000 as opposed to the potential 330 or 40. With it as it's proposed, we're seeing a small increase this year and then a fairly stable rate as you move from left to right, and then a bit of a drop when you get to fiscal year 2029. This is really what we want to see, I think, in borrowing. We don't want to see big swings up or down. Sometimes it's necessary because we might have a large, for example, 10 or 12 years ago when we redid a number of our roads, we had a very large increase in that, but it was offset in other areas to some extent. But this shows what we have for current debt. As you can see in the current fiscal year we're in, and that yellow star is actually over one column from where it should be. The yellow star is intended to show the current fiscal year, so that's my mistake. But that first light blue is the first payment on what would be the new fire truck. The dark blue is actually the last payment on the last fire truck we purchased. So it actually fits fairly well that we're starting this process this year, because then we have a fairly level of expenditure for debt service for fire trucks, which seems to be a direction that people have supported in the past. Any questions on long-term debt, what we're retiring, what we're anticipating in the future? Okay. So municipal budget highlights. I'm getting to the end of what I'm talking about, and hopefully we can get some more discussion on all of this. But we did look at competing budget goals. It's not an easy thing to say we want to support municipal services. We want to maintain a high level of service for things like roads and emergency services, and still maintain responsible budgeting. It's also not easy to say we want to maintain the level of staffing and the support that we have, but also recognize that we're looking at an 8% increase in staff costs because of inflation, because we want to keep good people working for the town. and we, really want to maintain the level of service. So those things, they're oftentimes at odds, but I think that we've done a good job of looking at all that together, working together to make sure that we can see a modest increase in times when most areas are seeing a sizable increase. Inflation last year exceeded 8%. And I'll jump to the bottom here and just say what we're looking at is about a 4.4% increase in the municipal impacts. Again, that's not county, that's not school. 4.4% over last year, and that equals about $46,000 in increase. And so that's spread out. I talked about the capital improvements and labor and materials being big drivers there. So that's really the bottom line. And I want to show and talk about that bottom line a little bit differently than we've done in the past few years by looking at some other things. But before we do that, I do have a slide here about property values and the mill rate. One of the things that we talked about earlier was the assessed value and the fact that we're doing a revaluation. The state of Maine has increased property values by about 10% every year for the past 2 years, and they're probably 10 or 15% this year. In order to keep pace with the state of Maine, the town of Readfield also has to adjust our property assessments. This is different than an appraisal that you might get from someone when you're trying to sell your house. But when we increase our appraised values to raise the exact same amount of taxes, the mill rate goes down by a roughly equal proportion. It's almost identical. There's a little bit of nuance there because of homestead exemptions and things like that. But generally, it's a 1-to-1. If the mill rate goes up 15%, the tax rate would go, the valuation would have had to go down. But what we're seeing over the last couple of years is the mill rate is dropping because our valuations are increasing. If the town doesn't increase our valuation, then we start losing out on money from the state of Maine, because the state of Maine says, well, no, you can't just keep your mill rate artificially low or artificially high because you're not doing your job as a town. You needed to come within 80%, I believe, of what, or maybe it's 70. Which is it, Teresa? Is it for assessed value? It's 70 or 80% anyway, 80%. We'll say 80. Yeah, so you have some flexibility there, but if we don't, then we start losing out on things like reimbursements for schools. We start losing out on homestead exemption value. So we try to keep up with the state, and that's what we've done for the past 2 years. We've increased our values 10%. This year, because the market has gone up so much, we're looking at 15%. Again, that has not been applied. All of the mill rates that we're talking about are just based on current value. The good thing is, again, when they are applied, it won't really affect what people pay. What will affect what people pay is the actual physical increases in the net amount of money we have to raise in taxes. So the estimated mill rate right now, as things are, is about 15.92. But we expect that with that factoring, the mill rate's going to go down to 14 in that area. And so that means for every $100,000 of value that you have, you'll be paying around, well, I guess it would be 140 per $1,000 of value. So 1,400 per $100,000 of value. So what that looks like, we've gone back and forth between the town, the school, and the county. This graph, the next one, I think really does show a lot. This is the relative property tax impact. And what this means is that of all the money that we have to raise out of taxes, property taxes, what portion is the school, what portion is the town, and what portion is the county? And what that looks like over the past, let's just say, almost 10 years. You can see that we've had the blue line is the town, that's the blue dotted line. The red dashed line is the school, and the black line is the county. And I'll start with the county. They are a smaller portion of the tax impact. They're a direct pass through. They have two departments. They have the sheriff's office and the jail, and they don't do much else. And so they have quite a bit of stability in their mill in what they charge us. And that's shown here. They have a very stable impact on taxes. And it's been a modest increase, maybe 1, 2, sometimes 3% a year, but really very stable. The town, we have a lot more going on, so we have more variability. But what you can see is back in 2015, we raised just a little bit over $1 million in taxes from our residents to pay for municipal services. And that number's gone down and then it's kind of gone back up again, and then it went down a bit. You can definitely see the COVID dip that happened in 2020, 21, 22. Things started to go down because we were working to make sure we could help people when they needed it most, when there was a lot of uncertainty around what was going to happen in the world, let alone in Readfield, Maine. And so over the last fiscal year, we increased a little bit. And this year we're increasing again in our impact. And I think it's important to point out that we are now, with this 2024 budget, the out-of-pocket impact that residents are feeling for municipal services is almost identical to what it was in 2020. So I think that we're probably going to see a little bit more increase over the next year or two, because we can only soften this so much. Because if you had gone on a straight line, even adjusting for inflation, you would expect us to be higher than we are right now. But this just goes to show, what has been happening in really the back pocket impacts. And then we have the top line, which is the school, and they did a good job as well during the pandemic, lowering the impacts. A lot of that was because federal dollars came through. But what I think we're seeing, unfortunately, is that if you look at the trajectory they were on, 5 or 6% average annual increase every year, they're still on that track. You could take that dip, and they've caught up more or less almost exactly where they would have been if they hadn't seen that dip. So I guess I don't want to comment too much more on the school budget, other than to say that they seem to be consistent with that 5 or 6% increase. And I would say the town also and the county have been fairly consistent. So that's a good graph. And I think it gives a good idea of what's actually happening. Now I want to step back a little bit and talk about just I'm not there yet. This is graphically, I keep getting ahead of myself. Graphically, this pie chart shows that tax impact. So for every dollar you pay in taxes, 76 cents goes to the school, 6.6 cents goes to the county, and the town gets 17 cents, pretty flat on the nose, in the 2024 budget. Of that 17 cents, you can then break that out and see what each individual department of the town is costing you. That big purplish wedge, the top, that's debt service. That's 5 cents out of that 17 cents. Administration is, I think, the light green, and that's somewhere around 2.7 cents. And then dark green is capital improvements, and that's around 3 cents. So you can see how all this shapes up. And I like this graph because it gives a really good idea of where money's going. So I'll move on, and I think getting close to my final slide here. Municipal tax impact. We in the past have never actually calculated what the municipal mill rate was or the municipal tax impact. But I think it's really important for people to see, what this is costing them on an annual basis. So, and this is an imperfect number. There's a lot of little nuances, but I'd say it's 95% close. So this fiscal year that we're budgeting for, we're looking at probably about $636, and that's that middle column, estimated tax, for when you pay taxes for an average home. And again, this is an average home. People that have more real estate and more valuable real estate pay more. That's just the system that we have. Someone that has a modular home or a mobile home pays a lot less. And that's how taxes work primarily in local government and the state of Maine, for that matter. But I think it's important to see that $636, and again, go back to 2020, we are looking at $640 out of pocket. So we're looking, and the increase, 4.4%, it's $26 difference. So this year, for an average homeowner, they're paying $26 more than they did last year for municipal services. And I think that we've been fairly consistent. Again, you can see the drop, you can see the increase, but it's been fairly stable. And I guess I'm happy that we've been able to do that, that people can have some certainty in what they're going to pay every year in taxes. Nobody likes paying taxes, but I'd rather not have any surprises. And that wraps up the town piece, the school budget, morenacook.org/budget. They do have a lot going on. Again, 10%, it'll count for, that's a typo, 76%. I'll correct that for the next time around. And the county budget is usually around, I guess I said 6% of the total tax impact. This year, their increase is 5%. Their impact on Readfield is 1%. So that wraps up the budget discussion. We'll go back to shared view. And we can answer questions and talk more about anything anybody wants before we move on to talking about the warrant, which is a little bit different, and some of the key items in the warrant. I don't think I drink water.
Bill, can you tell us if there's any comment online? Okay.
Can I just ask, what did the school say the bulk of their, I mean, of course, salaries and then costs of things, but in general, is there something mostly driving that or everything's going
I'd
up?
rather not comment on that. I don't want to put words in their mouth.
Okay.
All I can say is what I said before, which is they're facing some of the same pressures we are for materials and labor costs, right?
That's
I
fair.
mean, fuel and all that.
One of the things they
Yeah.
pointed out was that they have Sean's going to help me out with this, at the school budget, about half of the 670,000 that they were looking at for Readfield share, which was about 15 point something %. About half of that was an increase in costs. And then the other half was due to a different formula that the state's using.
Yeah, the valuation of per student per capita. I couldn't really figure out what the formula and how it worked, and I don't actually think they could, but however the formula worked, it was dropping. What the town gets, what the RSU gets from the state was dropping by overall quite a big chunk.
Like
I think it
$700,000.
was 6, 7, yeah.
And so that's how they got up into, I mean, I think their total budget number was like $1.7 million on a $20 million budget. Is it 20 million or 15 million? I don't
I don't
remember.
recall.
I didn't bring it.
But
I have it open.
it was a lot.
Hmm.
So I think another issue that they're having is something Eric alluded to at the beginning, which is that during the pandemic, there were a lot of funds that came in under different programs. One of them was ESSER.
Yeah.
And a lot of new spending took place because they had new money. And if that spending and was spent on things that are continuing on, if there's no more money to pay for it, but you want that program to continue on, you have to find a way to pay for it. And so I think that's part of the increase. They did tell us there was not a negotiation this year. So it was an expected employee cost increase. And
one of the biggest ones for me was the line item of operation and maintenance was going up 21%. So to maintain their buildings and heat them and run electricity through them, because there's so many of them. And that because the newest building, which is the middle school, is 15 years old. And most of the elementary schools are 40+ years old, that the maintenance of those buildings was pretty significant, was what we heard too.
I think several of them, if not all, were built in the 50s and 60s. So you're pushing 70 years old. And so there's talk about needing reconstruction funds or new school construction funds. And so I was the first voice to say, maybe we need to look at being a school district rather than 4 towns in a district and ask the people, what do you think? Is it worth these huge increases in costs for education to keep these varied buildings? We have 6 buildings that house children daily. Is it worth keeping all of those? Do you build new ones? Do you consolidate? Do you close? What do the people want to do? If people are fine with spending more money every year to keep this going, then that's great. And if people are saying, you know, this is getting to be too much, can we look at another plan? Then let's do that. And there was some agreement around the room from different people from different towns and from the administration as well of doing an evaluation of the buildings, like an assessment of the needs for the buildings. You know, you look at a building that's 70+ years old. Is it meeting the educational needs? What's it doing for physical costs? And then you're providing programming in 4 different schools at the elementary level with administrative costs in 4 different schools. And if this is how towns want to spend their money, that's okay. But if it's not how towns want to spend their money, I suggested maybe we should ask, you know, get an assessment and then put it forward to the towns. Do you want to be more of a district than 4 towns? Which I think is fair. It's what we do on the town levels. You know, we don't consider the Mount Vernon or Wayne municipal budgets. We talked about Readfield. So they have a lot of tough issues. Certainly. And they say there's a lot of information online. I started looking at it and then I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'll just stay here in the Readfield. So
Yeah.
Well, also didn't COVID, the state, we started paying lunches and breakfast for everybody. And then the state says you're going to continue for everybody, but I don't know that the state has it funding funded it all.
through they have it in the current 2-year budget that they're proposing to continue on.
Are they good?
Yes, and then that's
So the-
another problem that they had is that
Yeah.
because people are all families receive free lunch and breakfast. Lots of families, it was like a 60% decrease in families filled in the free and reduced school lunch form, which doesn't fund just lunches or it doesn't help with just funding for food. It also helps with Title I programs and summer programs and other things.
And plays into that formula that I couldn't understand.
And something to the effect of like over $200,000 a year they're losing because people aren't filling in these forms. They went from 350 to like 120
Yeah.
that were turned in. So I suggested hire somebody to contact all the parents. Even if you hired them full time, you would still come out $200,000 ahead. You know, let's do something to move this along. So they seem to think that could work. So
that's the
there,
school. Yeah.
you know, it was a very give and take meeting and it's, we have to commend the school district for doing that. Most school districts don't do that with their towns where they invite all the select boards to come and they let us actually speak to them. It's very cooperative. It doesn't mean that we get any change particularly from doing it, but it's nice that you have the conversation. So that's a real plus for Maranacook.
So I guess any other thoughts from the audience here? Public.
So I guess we can move on to the warrant highlights, which will be the LUO revisions.
I guess I will say, because you mentioned information online, I want to point out, we have a tremendous amount of information on the budget online, including the line item budget, all the detail information. We have summary budget, it's all there. We've been putting it up as we've gone through the process, and now we have some consolidated stuff ready for the public hearings. So it's tons of information online. And I guess I'll go back to screen sharing and we can have some discussion about 3 of the bigger pieces that are coming up in the in the warrant outside of the budget, which are kind of policy directed. And those are changes to the land use ordinance and the beach ordinance that we're looking at, and then also the comprehensive plan update. And I'm going to get down to that slide, and I'm going to go from slide, and that one's not going to change. But so I'll just move on to the proposed land use ordinance changes. And Paula, would you like to speak a little bit? You've got a podium up here if you'd like.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm Paula Clark. I chair the planning board. Most years, the planning board puts together a package of revisions to the land use ordinance. We take a look at what's happened over the previous year. Frequently, we'll find things that either have not been clear or there are new requirements that need to be incorporated into the land use ordinance. So there are various reasons, but it has, for the most part, been an annual thing that the planning board has done. A review of the ordinance and then a package of revisions. The revision package that's before the town at this point is not final yet. The planning board is holding its public hearing on that package of revisions next Tuesday. We had hoped to have it completed earlier, but we postponed the first hearing date due to weather, and we'll be looking at that again next Tuesday. So following that hearing, we'll review any comments that we receive, and if adjustments are necessary to the language that we're putting forward, we'll make those adjustments and then provide the final document to Eric and the select board. The revisions are, there is some new language that's being proposed. Primarily, we're looking at clarifying existing provisions, making the ordinance language easier to read. And the best example of that is in the first piece, which deals with non-conforming structures, which is in Article 3 of the land use ordinance. The changes made here are principally for clarity. It's a very, the planning board's experience and observations over the past couple of years in particular have really highlighted for us the fact that this is a confusing section. It's just not laid out very well, and it's difficult for people to understand, including the planning board. So we've looked at reorganizing that section in particular so that it flows a little better. And in doing so, I think that the clarity that has been missing is enhanced quite a bit. We've modified some of the language to make certain standards and requirements clearer. And there are a couple of pieces that stem from state law that we're looking to incorporate specifically. They're not new necessarily, but either they are not articulated at all in the land use ordinance and should be, or there is not the clarity there with regard to the state requirements. That's particularly true when you're looking at the requirements around non-conforming structures in the shoreland zone. And quite a number of the applications that come before the planning board are in the shoreland zone. So we do believe that it's important for the ordinance to be clear so that both the town and the residents, the property owners that are required to maintain the standards in the ordinance understand what it is that's at play here. The second piece in Article 6 is quite simple. It specifies that we will allow electronic submissions of applications to be presented. In practice, that already happens, but the ordinance doesn't state it. And so we're just including that so that there is no misunderstanding about electronic submissions in lieu of paper. The third piece is Article 8, Section 16. This is a new provision, again, based on the planning board's experience over the past couple of years, and some input that we've had from interested parties in town. We're proposing a new provision that would require screening of storage facilities and areas. In part, this is in response to a proliferation, not only in Readfield, but in other towns as well, of such things as commercial self-storage facilities and other types of storage facilities, warehouses. And presently, the ordinance does require that any manufacturing facility processing facility, other types of commercial or industrial facilities be screened from public view and public roads. And this adds storage, which is non-agricultural. So agricultural storage would be exempted from this. There is an opportunity under certain circumstances for that provision to be waived. There is a general opportunity in the ordinance to waive certain standards and requirements under particular conditions. And the fourth and final piece stems from state law, state rule. So it already is in place. That provision limits the placement of more than one dock on a single parcel in the shoreland zone, unless it meets some special circumstance in terms of footage along the shoreline. Very large lots, if there's twice the frontage, there's an opportunity for more than one dock. Again, this is a state standard, and we're looking to make the land use ordinance consistent with that state standard. So in a nutshell, that is it. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
And you said your public hearing is when? Next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday,
Okay, here.
here at 6:30
And on Zoom.
and on Zoom.
Thank you.
So Paula, when you talk about screening of storage places, what does that mean? Screening?
Screening is in order to shield those facilities from public roads, from abutting properties, any abutting use. We would require the screening, which could take the form of a fence, a berm, vegetative screening like trees. So there are a number of options, but the screening would be basically to minimize the visual impact of that kind of a facility.
Are you talking about approving new ones, or are you talking
Yes,
about
yes.
existing ones?
Not existing ones. No, this is
Okay.
going forward.
Even things like just personal storage space?
No, this is commercial principally. The ordinance presently, as I mentioned, requires screening for, I believe it's for solid waste facilities, any type of a commercial manufacturing facility or processing facility. And so we would be adding storage facilities to that list.
Because I know somebody that locally wanted to expand their storage space that they were renting out to residents, and the planning board had said you have to screen that. And it seemed to me that it was like we're trying to hide like new business in town or something. It didn't seem like it would be unsightly, but it had to be screened with vegetation, and I wouldn't have thought that would have been something that would be unsightly. It was just like storage space, but that was one of the hurdles they had to get over, and another town didn't require that. So he wasn't doing that in Readfield. He was moving to another town. So it's just an added expense for somebody trying to come in and expand a business, which I don't know, it just didn't seem business friendly to me. And it seems like that should be something that should be on the comprehensive plan of being business friendly and inviting in businesses without a lot of hurdles that don't really add to their business success.
You know,
So
I
that would be good comment to give at the public hearing for this.
Okay.
Because this isn't the forum for that, because Paul is not the committee. She's just a piece of the
Right.
committee. So they need to hear that.
Okay.
But I think it is pretty clearly spelled out as for commercial, institutional and industrial
And this
uses, so
commercial
not
is-
personal.
Commercial is business, and it
Yes,
just seems
right.
very, anyway, that's my 2 cents on business friendly.
Thank you,
Okay,
Paula.
thank you.
Really appreciate you sitting through the hour and a half plus before your turn. And we move on to the beach ordinance, proposed beach ordinance.
Yeah, and so I can talk about this just briefly. Basically, the history is that we had that, it's been on town beach for 25, 30 years, something like that.
At least.
At least, yeah, maybe not, maybe more. It started off as a private club under private ownership. And up until a couple years ago, it was always a fee-based system, so you had to pay to use it. A few years ago, we switched that model and wanted to have it become a true public beach. And so now it is free to all residents in the sense that all residents can use it without having to pay for a pass. They still pay for the maintenance and upkeep out of taxes and things like that. But that transition from being a private club to being a town space that was accessible only by a permit, we've always only had informal rules that really didn't have any basis to them, and no real way of clarifying who was responsible for what piece of that property maintenance. And so the beach ordinance that is being proposed is based on a number of other towns. But what it does is it gives an administrative structure. It gives a way for the select board and the rec board and the conservation commission to work and to make sure that we have a beach that is safe for users, that has some environmental considerations being taken care of, that we have regular water testing during summer months when there's issues with goose shit. Stuff like that. We want to make sure that it's well maintained and protected and properly used so that we can all benefit from it, because we're all there now if we want to be. So this ordinance, basically, I'll read the purpose really quickly, but I think I hit most of it. It is to provide for the enjoyment, health, welfare, and safety of all persons using the town beach, to provide a means of maintenance, operation, and protection of the town beach, and to provide a family-oriented atmosphere for lawful users of the town beach. The town of Readfield is further committed to maintaining accepted environmental standards to preserve the ecological quality of the town beach and waterways for future generations. And so that gets to some of the testing requirements and making sure that we have minimal erosion, things like that. But it also helps provide for things like access. I think this is something that's hopefully going to improve how we operate. And in large part, it really is based on what's already happening there. The select board already has the authority to set those rules, but this just gives them a legal basis to actually keep things on track. So we do have a copy of that ordinance on the website, and it will be posted with the warrant. And we actually have copies already up on the website. So if anybody wants to look at that in more detail, it's a quick read. It's 5 or 6 pages. The real substance comes into the things that the select board then works with the rec board to promulgate the rules for the beach. The no smoking rules, the keeping the dogs off, all of that stuff. So, Catherine, did you want to add anything about that, about the process?
Where it's a new ordinance and it's on the water, we're very cognizant of the troubles that Winthrop has had with the mooring ordinance there. And so one of the things that we had asked Eric to do was to look at other towns' ordinances so that we weren't going to just kind of create something out of the blue, but something that was based in reason. And we know that he did that because he provided one of the funniest moments of the season when we read that we needed to be sure that we prevented sharks from reaching the shoreline. So I think you had used the town of Wells maybe had a beach ordinance.
Wells, or one of those coastal ones, because they had some interesting stuff about not having fires on the beach and
Right.
But yeah.
And so it was just proof positive that Eric did look at many different towns and tried to pull together something that was reasonable and fit our town. And we would really look for feedback from the town voters, especially prior to when we vote on this, to try and make this as reasonable and accommodating to the needs of Readfield and its residents prior to voting it in, because it's much easier to change it now than to revise it next year. And all of the rules that we've talked about are things that are already there, like the kayak rental rules and the sign up form and the rental of the beach form and how you get a beach pass. And you have to come to the town office or get it from the attendant on site. So we're not creating new rules. We're just trying to formalize the structure so that it more legally fits the way everything else in town is run. We do. The town does. We've been doing that for probably a decade at least, but we tried to have most of that be paid for by beach passes, the fees from the beach passes, but the town was doing it. Prior to that, I think the rec board had a beach committee or there was a beach board. I'm not exactly sure what
It was mostly Tom Donegan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it was mostly Tom.
He was a saint, keeping that place up and running for us.
Right. But so what we did through town meeting vote, I think it was 3 years ago, was we formalized that the cost would be shared by all property owners in town, rather than having part of it being shared by all property owners and part of it being paid by the users. And we have experienced a fairly large increase in use at the beach, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we've also had some really hot summers, but yeah, it's been, we've seen a lot more use and a lot more different people coming in, so it's been great.
So it appears that people have been enjoying that.
So that's the beach ordinance. Any questions, anything else? Yeah, okay. So the last thing on the agenda tonight, we get out of here before 8:30, I think, is the comprehensive plan update. And Jessica, would you like to come up and give us a summary of that?
And just before you get started, Sean and I were kibitzing just a minute or two ago about, will we have to extend the meeting? And since it was posted till 8:30, if we get to 8:30 and we're not done, I'll have to interrupt you so that we can have a motion to extend the meeting.
Okay,
Which is no problem at all. No need to rush. I just want you to know in advance why we might interrupt you.
all right, so I'm gonna do a 3-year process in 3.5 minutes. Hi,
Okay.
I am Jessica Gordon. I am the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Committee here in Readfield. We started this process back in 2020 and it got derailed pretty quickly by a pandemic, also ongoing census issues. Just so the comprehensive plan is it's the story of our town and sort of the story of where we want to see the town go. And it's a huge document. It's probably going to end up being, I don't know, 300 pages by the time we're done. We got a lot of it on the website right now, including the draft. If you can only take like a look at one piece of it, I would really suggest there's a 47-page goals and policies section. And that is really the meat of the comprehensive plan. That is where we're going to get into like what we want to see for different aspects of our town, whether that's the economy or whether that's the ecology, the community, all the different pieces of our town and where we want to see us go in the next 12 years. We try to do it every 12 years. The last one was 2009. Here we are, it's 2023. You're all going to vote on it, hopefully in June. We have a meeting next Wednesday. They are a public meeting. So if you have other questions that I can't answer in 2.5 minutes, I'm happy to answer them. Right next Wednesday, we do have a meeting. Yes, 6 o'clock here. Yeah. Okay. We have persevered with it. There's been a lot of people coming and going off the committee, but really there's been a core group of folks that have worked really hard, collaborating with all the other town committees from the select board to the planning board, conservation. All of them have had their say. You have had your say in the form of several surveys that have been going around. We had almost 300 responses to those surveys. So the responses to those are up on the website as well. If you want to see what people have said about what their priorities are for Readfield in the next 12 years. KVCOG, the Kennebec Valley Council of Governments, has been helping us all the way through. And they've been really great for getting data for us. So, the bulk of the plan is this story from census data and from the data from the town that tells the story of both the history, the archaeological resources, all the businesses in town, all the watersheds in town. So there's a lot of, if you're into data, you can nerd out on this plan. There's a lot in there. We are moving towards the end of it, so we have a few more meetings left. We've been really going through all of the chapters. Future land use is coming up next week. It's bound to be a rager. So, join us if you'd like. There's also a vision statement up there, which I'm not going to go through point by point, but does anybody have questions about comp plan?
When you vote on a comprehensive plan, is it the whole package or is it separate?
It is the whole package, and just, the comp plan is not a mandate. Nothing in it is the select board does not have to do anything that's in there. It's guidance that comes from you and everybody who's had their voice heard as part of this whole process. But yes, you'll be voting on the whole plan. Any other questions?
But it's not quite in final form. It's still, and it might be 300 pages and we're going to vote on it in June. Okay.
That is.
But we'll have it for a couple months before we're voting on it.
Yes, and most of the draft chapters are up and they're ready for you to look at. We'll be finalizing the future land uses was a big chapter that Paula has been working on really hard. And as soon as she's got a working computer, we'll be actually typing out some of the stuff that's left in there. But
will that be done by next Wednesday's meeting? Probably not.
that's what I believe we're discussing that chapter at next Wednesday's meeting. So the final, the draft as of next Wednesday will go up on the website at that time.
Oh, the final public one is in April though, right? When's the final public?
The final public hearings, and we can actually, some of the important dates coming up. The last public hearing that we can talk about all this stuff is on May 31st, but the comp plan has a whole separate schedule.
Right.
A lot of this information has been up for months, and a lot of it, and we will have final documents up in short order. It really will be coming right
I
to a
think
close.
10 out of 12 chapters plus the vision statement and the draft policies and goals are all up there.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple chapters like transportation, which is again, mostly data. A lot of these chapters end up being heavily data. If you really want to get into the meat of like what the vision is, it's the vision statement and the goals and policies that I would really suggest if you've got time for 50 pages. That's where the meat of it is. The rest of it's a lot of census data. It's not really stuff, you could argue with it, but it's facts and figures and maps and things. So
It's kind of like reading a storybook about Readfield.
yeah, it's really beautiful. It's been a lovely thing to be a part of, really. I've learned a lot about our town. So
I would think the land use section would be of high interest. I mean, that is something people can point to and go, you guys wanted it this way.
Sure. And again, the goals and policies section is that the land use goals and policies are in that chapter up online right now. So in terms of like what we're saying that folks are interested in doing in terms of land use, that's already out there.
I'll just add one thing, Jessica, especially with that piece about the future land use. We have had a lot of public response, and a lot of people have said they want to see things. They want to maintain Readfield's rural residential character. They want to see us grow, but they want to see us grow in a way that makes sense. They want to support local small business. They want to support local agriculture, but no one's looking for wholesale change. And so that actually makes the future land use pretty easy. We just want to make sure that we don't do anything to screw up the good stuff we've got going right now. And that's a big part of the message that we've seen and heard from folks in town, is that they'd like to have another restaurant or two. They'd like to have a gas station. And they'd like to have a little bit more business, but they also want to make sure people can operate from their homes, and that we can all enjoy our quality of life that we have here, which is pretty fantastic already. So, I mean, that's kind of the message I've been hearing.
And again, all those results are up online too, so you can see what your friends and neighbors have been saying to us. The survey results are it's a lot of pages to go through, but the information's out there. So.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. Can I have a motion to extend the meeting for 10 minutes, please?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion, a second to extend the meeting for 10 minutes. All those in favor? Thank you. You can continue. The question, since you're not at the mic, that was asked is, who's going to draw up the final plan?
We've been doing it all along. Yep. So the drafts that are up on the website now are what you're going to end up for the most part voting on. I don't think there'll be many changes to what's up there.
Yes.
Buy the extra land, then, but that goes in with the whole plan, right?
The whole thing's, yep. Yeah.
It's an approve or not approve. And
Yep.
so if the town body votes to not approve, then we would go back and hold some meetings and try to figure out what parts it was that people objected to, because it's an up or down vote. And so to try and then you'd have to rework it because we're required by law to actually have a comprehensive plan. So it's
Yes.
something we do have to eventually get into a form where people will pass it. So the time is now to let the committee know that, we disagree with this. Just
Yeah.
because something on the order of 300 people have said X, there's a group of us who say Y. And if you're large enough, then, that's the way it'll go.
See, I'd like to have it all.
Sure, absolutely. Me too. I'm with you. If somebody's got a money tree out there, we could start planting those in all of our lovely open space.
Well, and a point of the money piece, I mean, this is a plan. This is not an obligation to spend money. There's been some misinformation presented that this is committing the town to millions of dollars, but that's just garbage. This does not
Yeah.
require us to spend any money if we don't want to.
I will
That's the
say,
nice thing about it. Where we spend money is the town meeting warrant every year. So if something comes up out of this plan and we decide we want to vote on it, then we can vote on it. But this plan does not obligate us to spend anything.
yeah, I also want to say that the mailing that went out a couple of weeks ago
Yeah.
has no basis in reality in our work. That was somebody who decided that they knew what was going on and has not been coming to meetings, has not been. Again, it's not like we can't force anybody to spend money. It's just a plan that says, what might be nice is if we could do this. And then if that works into what the select board over the next 12 years thinks we can afford, then that's great. And if not, then, and another thing that it can do is help us get grant money, which could be a really great way of, having our cake and eating it too, because we could get money from other places to do the things that we want to do over time.
So the comp plan acts as a guide. It's sort of a roadmap for us to follow. There are things that are set out as goals that need to be looked at annually or every 5 years or some more often. And different groups are charged with that. Primarily, the planning board has the most stringent layout, or it did in the current comp plan. And the select board has a list. But the important thing to remember is that the purpose of the select board is to implement what town meeting approves. So the laws and the spending that town meeting says, this is what we want to have happen. The select board is charged with making sure that's what happens. And the select board is the one who chooses what goes on the warrants based on what's provided by our town government, which is a town manager form of government, and by valid petitions from citizens. And our job is to make sure that those things happen. And so if something's in the comp plan, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. It means that we could suggest that it happens and put it out to the voters, and the voters get to say yes or no. And of course, with everything, it's the majority rules, even if it's just by one vote. And so the new comp plan would act as a guide for the select board and for all the various committees to ask for certain things to happen in town. And then if that's not what the populace wants to have happen, it won't.
Yeah, whatever the select board decides they want to do, it's not going to happen if the town doesn't agree. They're not going to vote for it.
So like we voted down the broadband issue last year,
Yes.
for instance. And then we voted to accept the beach with no user fees. So, it's just because it's put out there doesn't mean that it gets approved. And so what gets approved or doesn't get approved is then what we move forward with.
So if it's in the comprehensive plan, it doesn't go anywhere until somebody puts it on the warrant and it's approved or not approved.
I guess a for instance might be if someone wanted to come in and put a huge manufacturing facility here that was going to employ 7,000 people and use up 4,000 acres. Do we have 4,000 acres? That doesn't fit in our comp plan, our current comp plan. And so that wouldn't keep with the rural residential atmosphere. So the planning board would look at that and go by what the rules were. And then the town would look at that and either try to support it because it was something that was in the plan or not support it because it's something that's not in the plan. And so that's kind of the way we use it as a guidebook. Does that make sense? Paula?
Just one quick addition. I think when you look through a lot of the goals and strategies in the comp plan, you'll find many of them say things like, evaluate the possibility of doing X, Y, and Z. And there's a fair bit of that in the land use chapter in particular. Take a look at this year and figure out if we should do something. So it's not a list of absolutes or directives. There's a lot of evaluation and assessment that's called for.
Since Paula wasn't at the mic, I'll just add a short, can't think of the word. What Paula was trying to get at is that a lot of the things in the comp plan say that we should evaluate or we should assess something, any particular situations, and then make a decision on what we think is the best way to move forward. So it's not a list of absolutes of must-dos. Did I get that about right? Okay. Any other comments? Anyone from the select board or the budget committee? Well, I'll thank you all for coming. For anyone who didn't see this and it's recorded, it'll be up on the website. There probably isn't a Zoom recording because Bill has recorded it, so it'll be a YouTube thing. And all the materials are available online, as was noted. And we thank you for coming, and I'll call the meeting to a close at 8:40. Not quite as loud as Dennis.
Nobody is